Hey, good people, Dr. Lund here. Welcome in. Today, what I want to talk about is one of the biggest trials that many people have been watching, and that's the double murder trial of Alex Murdaugh. He is accused of killing his wife and his youngest son, Paul, brutally shooting both of them. The trial still continues to go on at this point in time, and this video is not about any kind of legal analysis. There are way smarter and way better people to do that with some of the LawTube channels that have wonderful, wonderful daily reviews of the testimony. So this video is not a debate whether he's guilty or innocent of the double homicides. Rather, what I want to look at are some of the behaviors and some of his possible signs and symptoms that could be related to an opiate dependence. So if you're new to my channel, please consider subscribing and liking. And if you are already a subscriber, please like the video. And for anyone, please leave your comments, thoughts, as well as any recommendations for future videos that you would be interested in seeing. Right off the bat, I know there's been some speculation by some folks that this admission of an opiate addiction is something that Alex Murdaugh has made up as part of the crazy scenario and the chaos of the case. However, what I'm basing my assessment on is one, that he made an admission to at least one of his friends. His family already seemed to recognize that he had an issue with prescription medication and pills. There were several checks written to a known drug dealer in the area, and these checks were confirmed. And the fact that he had gone to rehab, and of course they do blood levels there, and from some of the court testimony, it appeared that there were both barbiturates and opiates in his system. Now, from this point, I don't know if he is on any additional medication or psychiatric medication. We don't have information about past psychiatric history, so I'm speculating as well, but there are some things that I've seen in his behavior, his actions, his reactions, his testimony, that make me wonder how his drug addiction and some of his behaviors, thoughts, and reactions may be associated with his drug usage. Here's just a very basic summary of opiates. Opiates are really powerful analgesics, which are basically painkillers. And they include drugs such as heroin, morphine, oxycodone, hydrocodone, and codeine. Now, for most people who may have had surgery or some type of an acute accident associated with pain, these painkillers would commonly be used on a short-term basis for, again, the normal person experiencing maybe some acute pain issue. In the medical world, our thinking of a long-term use of any kind of opiate would not exceed 3 months. So if Alex is saying he has been using opiates for 18, 20 years. That is a significant addiction, and significantly long term, that would cause a number of both physical, psychological, mental side effects that will affect all areas of his life and even change his brain chemistry from the chronic use over a period of that many years. Now, in Alex's case, we don't have a history regarding when he first started taking pain medication, for what symptoms, if it was via prescription. So we have no historical information about that. The only thing that we can say we know with some confidence is he started at one period of time during his life and became addicted and continued to seek out the medication by illegal means of getting the opiates for a number of years, from at least my understanding of what we've heard so far in the trial. When I look at Alec and the family history that I'm aware of, here are some of the patterns that have been in this Murdaugh family for generations: corruption, gambling issues, addiction, financial crimes, violence, illegal activities, infidelity, compulsive spending, irresponsibility, and protection of bad acts. That seems to be the hallmark and some of the standards that over these decades and decades of this family have become really the standards of the Murdaugh name. What's facilitated this history of a long laundry list of patterns are the fact that in Alex's case, he was born into wealth, an extreme life of privilege and entitlement, basically a legal career that the path for him, as well as for now Buster, had been carved out almost a century ago. And probably one of the biggest pieces of that is power. How much power that each of the things I listed about corruption and gambling, etc., how that affected the ability for Alec and his family, and that's extended family, to be able to get away with things, be the exception to the rule, be special, but probably also have to carry somewhat of a responsibility of family secrets, because this family had a lot of secrets going back to their origins, again, decades ago. Now, if you ever experienced addiction or have lived with someone in the family or as a partner or spouse with an addiction, you know there is a tremendous amount of chaos in lots of different forms, with lying and deception, stealing, trust issues. The one very chaotic thing that I think people first notice with Alec and his situation is that there is definitely a pattern of a number of people's death that somehow are connected to him or connected to his family. From what we know, there was a death of his housekeeper that had fallen on the stairs. And then we also know that Alec had told one of her sons to sue him, and Alec took the money that the two brothers of the housekeeper should have gotten, but he stole it. And there was another murder of a young gentleman, Stephen Smith, that nothing had been proven, but there were beliefs that there was an association with this murder and Alex's two sons, Buster and Paul. And some reported gossip, if you will, that Stephen was a young gay male that was in a relationship with Buster. However, that hasn't been verified, but there were a lot of concerns about this gentleman's death that at first was thought to be a hit and run, but interestingly, his death case has been reopened to evaluate if there was something more, which his mother definitely believes that her son was murdered, and she believes the Murdaughs had something to do with it. Then there was another murder or death from the boating accident related to Paul being intoxicated while driving the boat, where a young woman, Miss Beach, Mabry Beach, was killed during that accident, which seemed to be the beginning of people uncovering all the financial crimes that Alec had been committing at his office to take money from clients, from the firm. That sort of started that mudslide. And then from the boating accident, there was the murder of Maggie and Paul. And then a few months after that was an interesting sort of suicide attempt done by somebody else to Alec, which he survived. But again, a very chaotic and odd scenario of Alec hiring somebody. Well, he didn't even pay him. He asked him to come and shoot him so that his only surviving son, Buster, was able to collect about $10 million. Now, with each of these terrible incidences, there seems to be either questions of theft, of money, corruption, interfering with a case, such as in Stephen Smith's case, or some of the other occupants of the boat that Paul had gotten in a wreck with, as far as trying to get the occupants to say Paul was not driving. Maggie and Paul, that has yet to be determined, but again, a horrific incident. And the bizarre incident of Alex hiring somebody to shoot him, not paying them, who missed, and Alex was basically had no ill effects from that. Okay, so just starting by looking at some of the risks Alec has for drug abuse and addiction, we're looking at genetic factors. Positive, yes. Throughout his family, there have been reported addictions to alcohol, probably other addictions that hadn't been identified, but yes, those were present generationally. Environmentally, it sounds like there is historical pattern with Alex's family going back generations to the first thing we know about a train accident that sounded like it was more of a suicide, but it was prosecuted as an accident where the family made money from it. And so there were secrets, there was an image to keep, there were a whole lot of probably nonverbal rules in the family, which are usually the strongest, are nonverbal rules that spouses and children pick up quite quickly of what's okay to talk about and what's not okay to talk about. So environmentally, there were probably a lot of things emotionally that were off limits, not open to conversation. And then when you look at the social factors, again, probably the biggest issue is the amount of power this family had accumulated over decades, and that they had an image of perfection and power and wealth and entitlement to maintain up until Alex's family basically disintegrated. But up until that point, Alex and his family were continuing on that particular goal of keeping everything looking perfect in the family when it was so far from perfect. So he scores very high risk on all the genetic and biopsychosocial factors of somebody with a propensity for an addiction. Now, here's some of my thinking about looking at his behavior and the effects of opiates. Now, Alex supposedly has been on opiates for in excess of, let's say, 18 years. We'll just round it there. And so looking for the issues of maybe depression, fatigue, tiredness, slow motor skills, pupils being constricted, dry mouth, decreased concentration, and watching him in some of the interrogations, there could be some evidence of that with some of his lack of reaction, lack of emotion. When he's sitting in the car talking to the police officer and his attorney is there, he moves his arms as if they're his hands and his arm is one unit. It's not very fluid. But here's the rub. He's been on, let's say, the opiates for so many years on supposedly a consistent basis. So I don't think we're going to be seeing the euphoria, the high, the drugged look from this gentleman, probably because at this point in time is he's needing to take the medication to keep him from withdrawals. Some of the symptoms, if they are symptoms that I noticed with him, is he does do a lot of sniffing, which is kind of a common characteristic, but could be caused from other issues. There was a lot of head bobbing, head movement, as well as I noticed a lot of mouth movement that seemed possibly to be involuntary, and that could be sort of a, like what we would call a tardive dyskinesia from perhaps psychiatric medications, which is sometimes an effect an individual may acquire if they've been on some psychotropic medications, some certain psychotropics, where they may have some involuntary movements. Where I noticed during court, he's eating a lot of candy, he chews gum a lot. Even during the interrogation, he asked the police officer for some gum that he saw in his car, which again could be some of the dry mouth. Now his reflexes seem slowed. However, living in the South, I will have to say, sometimes a slow cadence to speech, and it's by no means slow thinking or a sign of intelligence or their lack of, but sometimes the conversation is a bit slow. And in fact, I notice I talk slow. I'm okay though. But anyway, that could be some long-term effect. But what I really think has been quite devastating for this family, long before Alec and his chaos began decades ago, is there seems to be probably a tremendous amount of shame that this family has covered for years. And with somebody in Alec's position, with all the charges, 90 federal financial crime charges that seem to be related to covering his tracks, buying drugs, trying to have a lifestyle that he was living above his means, even though he was at one time a wealthy person. But when you take that all into consideration, and you also look at some of the comments that his wife had made to the second housekeeper, saying that she knew more was going on than Alex was telling her. She wanted Alex to be able just to sit still and talk to her. Some of that certainly could be the stress of the situation that he was facing, and the, as I said, the mudslide of all the charges, being fired from the law firm, again, being exposed for the financial crimes, taking money from clients as an attorney, that's kind of the worst of the worst. And so his world is falling on top of him. But also, interestingly, a comment his son, Paul, who was murdered, had said shortly before the murders happened, is that Mom had found 2 bags of pills in your computer case. When you get home, we need to talk. And having the nickname for his son Paul as the little detective. What that all means to me in a bigger picture is there were truly dysfunction in this family. And when you have someone with addiction and probably associated personality disorders and probably some mental health disorders on top of that, and you look at the parenting skills and the effects. I mean, we've got Buster, who was expelled from law school because of a cheating scandal. Paul, already into abuse of alcohol and possibly drugs, having the boating accident. It's sort of like you could see there is such an overriding dysfunction of this family of trying to keep the picture looking perfect. And again, in the midst of just an onslaught, an avalanche of all the secrets, all the shame spilling out at their feet, and then death after death, murder after murder. This really seems like a case that has so many tentacles and threads to it. Do I think these murders were caused from an addiction? No. But I think the addiction played into the overriding dysfunction of the theft, the issues with probably in the marriage that hasn't even come out and may never come out. But you can't have healthy relationships when you're hiding and deceiving and lying and covering things up, going through probably some withdrawal issues all at the same time. one of the big questions people had is, can you actually spend $50,000 a week on a drug habit? Well, my answer to that is, I don't know, maybe. That doesn't really seem to be that important. I mean, I think on one level, he's probably buying the pills so that they're not spiked with fentanyl. He's not buying from a street level drug dealer. He's buying the good stuff. I don't know how much, and we probably will never know how much medication he had taken daily and over the years. Again, as I said, some of those initial effects of euphoria and peace and calm, those probably are some things that are long gone with his addiction at this point, and just trying to keep the side effects of withdrawal in check was probably one of his biggest need if he was such a very intense and regular and consistent drug addict over all the years that he proclaimed to one of his friends. So folks, again, doesn't say he's guilty, doesn't say he's innocent. What, if anything, it says is there's a tremendous amount of dysfunction that all was ill-managed, probably from the get-go and through family tradition. And it is a horrendous tragedy that there are so many litter bodies in the wake of this dysfunction in order to keep the shame and keep the secrets. So, folks, I hope that gives you a little bit of insight into some of the things I've noticed when we're talking about an addiction. And this is, again, aside from all the legal issues. I'm not an attorney. That's a lot of different channels with folks who are attorneys that can talk about the legal aspects. But I'm just looking more at the psychiatric, psychological aspects. Regardless if this man is found guilty or not guilty, he will probably end up in prison for a very long time. And again, one of my questions is, and we don't know the answer to, and probably will never know, is when he had gone to rehab, was that the first time he had gone to rehab after his odd attempt at a homicide-suicide on himself? How is he being treated? Is he being on some type of a medical assisted treatment by getting maybe medications to help him with the withdrawal process, as well as again keeping him from going through withdrawals under a physician supervision, especially after that many years? That would be really challenging. Anyways, folks, give me some of your thoughts. Some of you folks have experience firsthand with addiction or have lived with someone with addiction. Anything you saw or noticed with this particular gentleman? One, we know there's tons of family dysfunction, and that was rearing its head as really he was spinning out of control, and all the problems were then being just absolutely uncovered. I appreciate you all watching and listening, and as we go forward, there's more of the trial to watch, and so we will see you in the next video. Thank you again so much for being here.